a royal colony. The first royal colony was Virginia. That's when a corporation, like the Massachusetts Bay Company was the origins of Massachusetts. The Virginia Company of London was the origins of Virginia, but it went bankrupt. And to save the embarrassment, the English government took it over. New Hampshire was the second royal colony, and it was specifically created to do with or to limit Massachusetts. The world west, because and the stimulus there was that Massachusetts, having been ordered not to purchase secretly Maine. And the English government just drew this wedge right down between the halves of Massachusetts. And it was one of just many, many factors that made New Hampshire dependent upon, literally, upon the arrogance of Massachusetts for its existence. Yes.
I notice on here it says town grants paid by the Smithsonian proprietors. What is that about?
Where are we now?
We're on this one.
Okay. Oh, the Smithsonian proprietors. Yes. Well, after Bennington, the boundaries controversy around the southern border also included the Maine border, or the eastern border, was made around 1740. At the same time, Ben Wentworth became the governor of New Hampshire. There's war going on. He's a cautious person. He doesn't, but he begins to see that Great Britain is going to give him a lot of terror. I don't know what role he played in it, but a group of his relatives purchased the residue of what was called the Smithsonian Pact. The Smithsonian Pact was a patent charter, basically, given for the land in New Hampshire way back in the 1630s, and Captain John Mason, and it was to land within 60 miles of the coast. And a group of relatives of the governor bought the residual Masonian pact, which allowed them the authority to get rid of or to disperse all the land within that 60-mile circle, which is the circle. And so many towns in New Hampshire were established by the Masonian proprietors. That's not to be confused with the town proprietors of the individual towns. And that there's no long story on that. Basically, Benny Wentworth never was a Masonian proprietor of his father or two cousins. New Hampshire was pretty much run by an extended family, the Wentworth family. At the time of the American Revolution, there were 11 councilors. 10 were first cousins or closer to the government. And we were very popular. Yes?
Does the Masons referred to here have any connection with the Masonic?
No, absolutely not. It has to do with a grant to Captain John Mason and his buddy, who were land developers from England. His buddy, they divided what was their grant of land on what now is the Maine and New Hampshire border. So it's absolutely nothing to do. It's the surname of the grant. Okay, let's go on to part 3. If you look at the map of the geography of town founding, there's a lot of them very light letters up in here, the year 1761. And it was done, actually, Benny Wentworth gave charters, or he and his council gave charters to 79 towns in the year 1761. About 20 in New Hampshire, the rest in what was then called the New Hampshire Grants, what is now Vermont. My notes say here the chartering frenzy of 1761. What caused it? Well, primarily the end of the war. And one of the strangest phenomena to me, if you walk capture of Quebec. And it was kind of strong. The French ran before the English. And then France says, here, take Canada. And that's literally like Quebec became part of the British Empire, but there's no danger then. No more danger. French and Indian wars are over. The second thing that occurred was, in the 1750s, Benning Wentworth is beginning to grant land across the Connecticut River all the way over. His first one was Bennington, he named after himself, Vermont, all the way over to our southern border with New York, and towns along the newly declared border with Massachusetts. He gets confident in assuming that the boundary of New Hampshire is what is now the western boundary of Vermont. And he granted
These are all Vermont.
124 of roughly half of the towns that
On the other
existed
side,
in
looking at the
Vermont. Over 50 of them in this year 1761. Well, New York claimed the same land based upon what proved to be the difference when the boundary was settled on the grant to the Duke of York, which is over the Connecticut River. And once the war was over, New York began, well, New Hampshire was the aggressor. They didn't tell New York what they were doing, but New York began to suspect that New Hampshire was doing what it was doing, and there was a legal suit that went to the Privy Council, that's the highest court in England, and Benning Wentworth doesn't know how that's going to come out. We know right after you got founded, the boundary decision created made what's now Vermont part of New York. And the trigger, we'll talk about it later a little bit, of the something that happened in this area was basically Vermont seceded from New York and created its own state during the American Revolution. So he's worried about the boundary controversy. He's testing, Benning Wentworth is testing what he can get away with. There's a lot of political advantages in giving away these towns. Each of the proprietors gets the equivalent of a proprietary right, was about half a square mile, or roughly 300 acres. And the cost might be nothing. Or the cost might, the highest I've seen, is the equivalent of 5 weeks ordinary wages, 10 shillings. So every time you give away a town, you're making a lot of friends. And Benning Wentworth knew that he was in trouble potentially in England because the new king had come in. We know him as George III. He's not what they tell you in the Declaration of Independence. He's just the opposite. He's a real softy. I like to point out he's 22 years old when he became king. It's like taking a guy who's just graduated with a degree in political science and Dartmouth and making him president. Formula. But he was a real straight arrow. And he didn't like trying to clean up the British government. And the happiness of the colonies was really based upon corruption. They didn't have to obey the law, they just told people in England, yeah, we're honest, we don't smuggle, we don't do anything like that. And this real straight arrow comes in to be king, and the first thing he begins to, his assistants begin to think, maybe we ought to change things in New Hampshire. So, and New Hampshire actually had a very good agent in England, a guy named John Tomlinson, as a member of Parliament. I have no proof of this, but I think he began to warn Benning Wentworth. If you've got actions that are going to give your supporters at home, start taking them facts. Any case, 79 charters were given in 61, and it was important in the differences again between New Hampshire and Vermont. In New Hampshire, when a charter was made, it involved what's called incorporation, or the right to set up government, and tax. And so it wasn't you had to wait for that because you get settlers in it, which made New Hampshire very popular. They had no problems getting people flooded in, and they didn't put in any ads, but they sent people down to Connecticut and say, and in New Hampshire, look, there's a lot of land available, just put your application in. And so your charter, which was granted, had a new set of proprietors entirely in it. The date you're celebrating here, when that was done, I should say, skipped over to a part here, unity, what became unity, was left out. It wasn't granted in 1761. Everything north was. The only 4 towns in this area that were not granted were Croydon, Cornish, which there's, I give them Compton Cornish for their celebration. I don't think Croydon had any. They did anyway, and Claremont, and Unity. And why were they left out? Well, we can't really know. People just don't write letters saying, I didn't do this because. But you can assume that basically, so this was so close to the limits of settlement in Charleston and Leinster and Acworth that you wanted to make sure people who would have some payoff through you were the ones that got these, especially given the potential for mill rights in Claremont. In any case, they were left out, and that was left, I think, especially Unity. There was that area over to the east of Unity, which later became Goshen, where they nicked off the corners of, I think, 5 different towns to make Goshen, including a little bit of the eastern part of Unity. Unity became an especially flexible place, or a space between Unity, to get the resolution of some whatever kinds of problems came up. And there's no evidence, I think, from what I've seen, that the first settlers didn't come here until 64. It wasn't that there were squatters around that you were going to have to take care of and accommodate. So what happened and then I've already said the proprietors under the Buckingham Charter had done nothing. So here was a very valuable political piece of property in what later became Unity. And what did they do? Someone, I can imagine, but I don't know who did it, probably Atkinson, said, look, we can solve a problem, the conflict between the Hampstead and Kingston people. We can solve a problem, we can create a new community, and we can give a signal, basically, by naming it Unity, that cooperation is what you're going to be rewarded for, not confrontation. And so, in any case, the timing was uncanny in a sense. The boundary decision in England was made 10 days, I think it was, after Unity's charter was granted. So suddenly, all that land over in what is now Vermont, that had been granted, lots of happy people getting it. Those people are unhappy because those charters are invalid. And that means that there's almost nothing left on the New Hampshire side. That's but you along with those people, especially from Kingston, according to the source that I was able to trace back your local story to a publication of town charters in 1884. Anyone who had access to information that I don't, and you probably don't have access to, it was the editor who had the responsibility of publishing this book with all the charters, and his headnote describes it very clearly. It wasn't just something made up by a journalist in the 20th century. He says basically, it was founded to resolve, in part, to resolve the differences in claimants to land under Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and compared to a map in this publication of both the land under the first charter of 53 and the one of 64. And it's the difference between 23,000 acres and 29,000 acres, and it's the whole area in the eastern part which eventually became Goshen, that became in the line of chart. So, basically it seems to me that the charter you're celebrating is the one you should be celebrating, because it did trigger the eventual settlement in the area as a whole. Any questions about this before I go to my brief epilogue? Yes.
I'm just wondering, the decision to this compromise that you're describing, was it made in New Hampshire or was it made in England?
Good question, and it's made in New Hampshire. Under Benning Wentworth is still governor. He's the wheeler dealer type. Particularly, I think the man who your charter is signed by, Theodore Atkins, both charters were signed by Theodore Atkins, was probably the architect of that. So it would be the stuff that's going on elsewhere would be coming in. So that's where you go if you have a group of 60 people who are looking for a township. In England had almost nothing to do with this. I can assure you King George III was basically knew nothing. Yes.
Pardon me for just a minute.
Who has the Honda CRV parked right down in the ramp?
Me. He told me I was parking it.
I need it moved. Can I have the keys?
Yep.
The first seat go back. It started to sprinkle.
Bring them back.
Yeah.